One of the first questions that people ask me when they're thinking about starting their own profitable co-living home is, how much does this actually cost? Not how much is your program, but how much does this cost to start my co-living home? Like in total, how much am I going to spend? And also another question I get is, how do people pay for their housing? So today I want to walk you through the startup costs and funding options, what you really need, what you don't need, and what I've seen work over and over again. This is not meant to scare you at all or to hype you up thinking you can start this with no money at all, because that's not true either. I just want to give you some clarity, because when you understand the numbers, then your fear tends to calm down. So the reason this topic sometimes feels overwhelming for a lot of people is because they're usually getting mixed messages. Some people online will tell you that you need no money at all or almost no money at all to start your co-living home. And then other ones tell you you need thousands of dollars before you even think about starting. The truth is somewhere in between, and it depends on how you structure your home and how you want to get from where you are now to open and operating. That's why I always say that there's no one size fits all number, but there are categories of costs that every group home has in common. So once you understand those categories, then everything becomes much more manageable. The biggest cost is the property, but you don't have to own the property. Let's start with the biggest misconception right away. You do not have to own a property to open a co-living or group home. Many people start by renting the house. And for a lot of people, that's actually the smartest way to begin. When you rent your house, your upfront costs are usually limited to the first month's rent and the security deposit, and maybe the last month's rent. That alone dramatically lowers the barrier to entry compared to buying a house. Buying a property can make sense later, but it's not a requirement to get started. What matters more is that the property works for the model. So the layout is good, the bedrooms, bathrooms, and also the location. You want something that's close to public transportation. Furnishing the home. The next major startup cost is furnishing. This includes the beds and the mattresses, the dressers or some other type of storage, living room furniture, the dining table and chairs, and the basic household items. You do not need to furnish the home like a magazine spread, and you don't need to furnish the entire house up front. What you could do is just furnish the common areas and furnish one bedroom, especially if it's a shared bedroom, furnish that bedroom, and then you can have your open house event and show people the common areas fully furnished and show people what a room is going to look like fully furnished. Once you fill that room, use that money to furnish the other room. Use that money to furnish the next room. You see what I mean? You don't have to furnish everything all at once. You just need the house to be clean, safe, functional, and comfortable. I always tell people, think about durable, not decorative necessarily. So you can source furniture from many places. New furniture, used, donated, or a mix of new, used, and donated furniture. This is one of the areas where you have the most control over your budget. You can go to places like Goodwill or the thrift store or the Habitat for Humanity store and find old, durable furniture. I actually like used furniture better than new furniture because used furniture is usually very sturdy. So I like to get some used furniture in my group homes. Before residents move in, there are some basic setup expenses that people sometimes forget to plan for. Things like utility deposits to turn on the utilities in the house, the internet setup, and the trash and water accounts. Also, you might have some minor repairs to make in the house or some safety updates to make. These aren't glamorous expenses, but they do matter, and you need to make sure you budget for them. They also tend to be one-time or front-loaded costs. So it's not something you're going to have to continue to pay for. But planning for those costs up front helps you to avoid surprises later. Another thing people ask me about is licensing and compliance. Now, this part depends on what you're doing and what your model is and also your state. I do independent group homes, which means in some states is actually there's a definition of a group home. And a group home provides, for example, in Texas, a group home provides personal care services. That definition just came out in 2025. So I've been calling my group homes for 6 years now, but now there's an actual definition of what a group home is. And I actually don't have any group homes. What I have are co-living homes. It's just shared housing. I don't provide any services, no personal services, no medical services, even no non-medical services. I don't provide any services at all. I only provide housing. So for independent co-living homes that provide housing only, you don't require any kind of license. It is unlicensed housing. But you still need to account for your business registration, especially if you're going to have an LLC, which I do recommend, your insurance, and any local requirements that you might have to pay for. This usually isn't the biggest cost, but it's an important one. And skipping this step to save money might create a bigger problem later. Marketing and initial outreach. You don't need a massive marketing budget to get started. Most co-living homes fill beds through relationships, not ads. That said, there are still some startup costs here, such as printing flyers. You might want a brochure. I use a trifold brochure. Your basic online presence. I do recommend that you have an online presence like a website. And then any kind of outreach to caseworkers or social workers or re-entry coordinators and that type of outreach. I use an email client called MailChimp to do my outreach, and there is a cost for that. The goal at the beginning isn't branding, it's more about visibility. So you want the right people to know that your home exists. So what's a realistic startup cost range? Let's talk about the numbers. For a rented home, many people start somewhere in the range of $10,000. The range depends on the rent for the house and any deposits that are required. And then also how furnished the home needs to be and your utility setup. And then it depends on the local market, depends on where you are in the country. Some people start with less than $10,000, but that's what I recommend is about $10,000. And some spend more. For example, if I were to open a home here in California where I live, I would need much more than $10,000. You really just need to understand what your setup requires. You don't need everything at once. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is trying to fund the entire vision up front. You don't need every room furnished. You don't need every room filled, and you don't need everything perfectly optimized on day one. You can phase things out. You can start with fewer residents and then build. For example, I was talking about furnishing one room, filling that room, and then taking that money to furnish the next room. Once you do that, you have cash flow that's helping to fund your next steps. You can phase this in. So what are some funding options? Funding option number one. Let's start with the most straightforward option, your personal savings. Many people use their own money to get started. If you go this route, I always recommend to keep an emergency fund buffer. And also be realistic about your timeline of when you're going to make the money back. I don't recommend starting with money that you cannot afford to use right away. You need to start with extra money, not money that you need right now. Funding option number two is family or private support. Some people fund their startup with the help from family, friends, or private lenders. And this can look like a personal loan, a short-term agreement, or a partnership. If you go this route, make sure that you have everything documented and discussed up front. Talk about expectations, the repayment terms, and also the roles. Mixing money and relationships without clarity creates stress, and you don't need that in your life. Funding option number three, business credit. So business credit is another option, especially once your business is set up. But most people who start this business have never started a business before. So if you've never started a business before and you have a brand new LLC, it's going to be hard to get business credit with a brand new LLC that does not have a credit history. But if you do have an LLC that you can use that does have some credit history, then you can use business credit. And that might look like business credit cards, lines of credit, or other types of vendor accounts. These tools can help with upfront purchases like furniture and supplies. The key here is discipline. Your credit should support the business, but not strain it. And then funding option number four, personal credit. You got to use this one carefully. You can use a personal credit card to get started. You should understand the interest rate, minimum payments due, and then your exit plan and your repayment plan. Use credit as a tool. It's not a strategy by itself, but it is a tool that you can use. Another option is partnering. You can use OPM, other people's money. You could partner with someone who brings the capital while you bring the operations. So they bring the money, you bring the knowledge. This can be a good fit when roles are clearly defined. But partnerships aren't shortcuts. They do require trust and communication and alignment. So make sure you have an agreement that's documented. I always encourage people to treat partnerships like a business, not like a personal favor. It's a business, so make sure it's documented and treat it like a business. What I don't recommend is starting without understanding your monthly numbers and having a target of where you want to be with your monthly numbers. And I don't recommend borrowing without a plan or assuming the funding is going to magically appear later. And I don't recommend just ignoring your operating expenses and startup expenses. You need to take those into accountability. Your startup money will get you in the door, but your operations are going to keep you there. So you have to make sure that you have your operations tight. Monthly operating costs matter more than the startup costs. So here's something that doesn't really get talked about enough. Your startup costs are important, but your monthly operating costs matter more. Things like rent on the property, your utilities every month, your supplies, and your maintenance and insurance. If those numbers don't work monthly, then the startup budget doesn't even matter. That's why I always look at cash flow first. Make sure that you have a plan where the amount that you're charging per month per bed is going to support your operating costs and give you a profit. This model works because of cash flow, not necessarily appreciation. If you own the house, then you are benefiting from the cash flow of this model and the appreciation of the property. But if you're renting the house, then you're depending on that cash flow. The cash flow of the business is what gives you that stability. The cash flow of the business supports itself over time, and that's what you're really building toward. You don't have to do all of this at once. You don't need every answer before you begin. You really just need clarity on what the next step is. Most people don't get stuck because they lack money. They get stuck because they lack understanding. Once the numbers make sense, the decisions become easier in your business. When I started, I didn't have unlimited resources. I had to make some intentional choices. I prioritized what matters in the business and I let go of what didn't. And then over time, the business started funding itself. That's the goal, not perfection, but stability. That's what I wanted, stability. When you start your business, you should be able to explain what it costs, how you're going to fund it, and how it's going to operate monthly. If you can do that, then you're not guessing anymore, you're planning. This information is for you if you want realistic numbers, you're willing to plan, and you want stability over shortcuts. And you want to build something that lasts. If you're looking for a zero effort, zero cost option, then this isn't it. But if you're willing to be intentional, then this is very doable. Your startup costs don't have to stop you. They just need to be understood. If this video helped you understand the financial side of opening a profitable co-living home a little bit better, subscribe to my channel. I share what I've learned from actually doing this. I have 3 co-living homes in San Antonio, Texas, and I live in Los Angeles, California. And if you're ready to take the next step, I'll make sure you have the information that you need to do it responsibly. I'll see you in the next video.